Namaste, and welcome to this satsang. I want to begin with a devotional mantra to Krishna because the topic of our satsang today is Bhakti. Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of love and devotion. Jai Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nata Narayana Vasudeva Jai Shri Bhagavan Krishna ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hari Bol. So again, namaste and formal greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining us on this satsang. And I was thinking about devotion and the role of devotion, particularly in the month of February when the day dedicated to Saint Valentine is about to come upon us a few days from now. And naturally there should be a day in the world that we dedicate to love. But this event, if you will, it's not considered much of a holy day because the practice of love, if you will, is more based or looked upon in Western culture as relationship love or the love of intimacy. What we're going to speak of tonight is, first and foremost, I want to differentiate between this lower love, if you will, or lust, as referred to in yoga and Vedanta as kama, and differentiate this from divine love, which is the love of God, the love of devotion for God and for the divine in all living things. So this is important to understand because these two are very much opposite to each other in human life. And in fact, the devotion is not something that's very understood. I was just walking outside a bit and reflecting on the beauty of nature, the warmth of the day, looking at the different trees at this time of the year because they change. And I noticed that people were shopping, people were in a rush to go here and there, which typically happens at the end of the day. And when we look at the two worlds, these two cultures, the differences between the Eastern and the Western culture, we see a stark contrast between the purpose of life, the aim of life, the definition of success in the Western culture is all material based, based on gain of finances. And when we look at Eastern culture, we look at a much more simple life, and particularly India is the land of devotion. This is the land where devotion reigns supreme. And so many images of devotion are still present today in modern India, considering that India and that land is thousands of years old. That idea doesn't make a lot of sense to most people in the Western world, because those living in the Americas and Canada, these parts of the world, the history is really only a few hundred years. So there's not much to look back. And its history has no traces of devotion. But when we look to India, that's what we look to India for, is the devotion. The land where all the religions have been allowed to exist and grow, and the land where multiple forms or images of the gods exist, male, female, natural, all types. And as I often say, the divine intelligence had to leave us some key, some map to find our way back to the truth source of existence. And he left that key in India. He left the essence of human life, divine love, in India. And so it is spreading now throughout the world, and it is spreading throughout all lands. And fortunately, the devotion that we're seeing is this form of Bhakti Yoga that is developing in the different yoga schools. So let's talk about these forms of devotion. I'm going to refer to the Narada Bhakti Sutras. This is a great text dedicated to this path and this specific branch of yoga. And it was also written, like many, in a sutra form. And I'm going to I'm going to refer to a few different sutras. And I want to start with Sutra 7 of the Narada Bhakti Sutras. Sana Kamayana Nirodha Rupatvat. Supreme devotion, not to be lusted for, because it is of the nature of cessation. So we should not lust after supreme devotion, because its path requires renunciation. This is the term nirodha. It is a common Sanskrit term. And so cessation is a type of renunciation, and it's related to another term in yoga called sannyas. To renounce the idea that we're the body, renounce the ego, renounce the mind, renounce the things in the world that aren't real in our life. And so kama, this first few words, Sana kamayamana. Supreme devotion is not to be lusted for. And so kama in a general sense refers to all our worldly desires, all aspects of our senses and everything that we seek in the world. And that's why we continue to embody. This is why we continue to come back into a physical form to fulfill these desires. So that's kama in the general sense. But kama in a more restricted or confined sense refers to the intimate or the sex energy. And so on the spiritual path, this kama, both aspects of it, desires in the outer world as a result of the ego and the senses, as well as sex pleasure, must be mastered, must be brought under the aspirant's control. Otherwise, we perpetuate samsara, the cycles of birth and death, and we support the world process. And all of this is sustained as a result of ignorance, avidya. We ignore our true essence, and we ignore the wisdom that is inherent in every single soul. The wisdom of the soul is available to all human beings. And kama, these worldly desires, these outer energies, and as well as our sexual energy, essentially have a downward pull and an outward pull. Okay? In yogic psychology, this is referred to as tamas, downward, rajas, outward. And this is completely in contrast to yoga and the path of yoga. And the intention of yoga is to unite our individual consciousness with the supreme consciousness. And this requires a completely different direction of the energy. The energy must be internalized and raised upward. So instead of down and out, it's in and up. And so the idea is to bring the energy inside of us, direct it towards the spine, and raise it up through the spine as greater awareness and as an integration. This is key. As an integration of our actions, our intellect, our devotion, and surrender for God. So the opposite now, or the supreme love, is referred to as prem. And prem is that light that dispels darkness. It destroys all ignorance, and it promotes the development of divine qualities, the qualities of the soul. And prem supports a universal love. So this is different from the idea that two individuals share. That is relational love. It's a form of love, but it has limitations. And the idea with yoga is to unite with the supreme love so that we recognize or establish unity consciousness. This is important. And this has profound implications. In the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna tells of 3 gates to hell, basically, that lead to greater suffering. Kama, which is lust. Krodha, which is anger. And lobha, which is greed or selfishness. Kama modifies itself into anger and greed, and therefore is considered one of the great enemies for all spiritual seekers. So again, we have to look at kama in the broader sense, not just limited to mastering of the sexual energy, but also the same energy that is used for sexual progeny or intimacy is the same energy that fuels outer desires. It's the same energy that supports the functions of the 5 elements. So Lord Krishna further says that this enemy, kama, resides in the senses, also in the mind, and also in the intellect. So the mind includes thought, the mind includes emotion, the mind includes the ego. So the mind includes those 3 aspects, and then the intellect is that 4th aspect, or what is referred to as the antakarana, the 4th component. And the intellect is superficial intelligence, information gathering, I call it. It is not real knowledge, it is not real wisdom, it is simply what people often refer to as you're smart or you're intelligent. But they make that statement or reference to a person who has gathered a lot of information. And this is worldly information, superficial information. It's not higher knowledge. It's not the knowledge of the true self, of the real purpose of life. On the spiritual path, the senses must be controlled by the mind, and the mind in turn controlled by a purified intellect. So what does that mean? We have to change and transform all of that information and cleanse it. It's like a type of detox for the mind. And this is why we often say it's so important on the spiritual path to unplug, to disconnect in this day and age. And because this helps us to detox the mind, it helps us to remove clutter, excess stimulus, impressions on the mind that don't allow the mind clarity. And a lot of this intellectual or superficial information not only clutters the mind, but speeds the mind up. It makes it rapid and produces anxiety, it produces restlessness, fear, and on and on. So the purpose of purifying the intellect or unplugging is to slow the mind and to give less strength to thought, ego, and intellect. You pull the power away. By unplugging, you're not allowing pranic energy to go to the senses and go outward to the outer world, as does the mind and all other functions. So the devotion is a form of purification, because devotion uses the same energy that we integrate for an emotion when we're angry, when we're unsettled, when we're unsure or fearful. That's an energy that the mind is utilizing. That same energy converted into devotion destroys ignorance. It destroys any idea that this world will bring us happiness. It destroys the outer pull, the outer influence that the world has on us. And this is where devotion is very, very powerful, because it helps us on the path to transcendence. So let's discuss sexual desire. Sex desire, again, is a lower energy. Ayurveda views this specifically for the purpose of progeny and to enjoy the family life and the married life. Control of the sexual energy should not be confused with any type of suppression or repression of one's energy. That is incorrect to say. Per the yogic and the view of Vedanta, psychologists seem unaware of the deeper truth and the reason why we want to curb and control this energy. And it's often labeled as unhealthy, as toxic, as explosive, and can lead to more other complexities. But we're not saying, again, to block it. What we're saying here is to transmute it. It's an energy, again, and it is considered the most vital of energies. It is referred to in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali Maharishi as brahmacharya. And its control promotes immunity and gives power to an energy referred to in yoga as kundalini. This kundalini energy, when it sits at the base of the spine, unawakened, it's there like a snake, coiled, settled in its little basket as the cobra sits. And when we play the divine flute and learn to work with the energies of our breath, our mind, our senses, our sexual urges, we take that kundalini energy and we direct it upwards through the spine. Now keep in mind, the Western view of the mind is very limited to the area of the head and the brain. But the yogic view of the mind is that it is fully integrated in your body. Mind and body are both integrated within the entire vessel. The mind is not just something that exists in your skull, somewhere connected to your brain. No, in yoga we consider the whole body. The body embodies the mind. So the mind is integrated within your entire vessel. And so the mind plays a major role in use of the sexual energy. The basic urge in every human being, in any living being, is to become perfect through self-realization. That is the goal of life. That is the supreme purpose of directing this energy. Because when you direct the energy, it culminates at the very top of the spine, where sun and moon are balanced, where male and female are fully dissolved, no longer exist, and where desire for some form, something outside of us is completely eradicated. That desire is completely ended. There is no more desire for that within us. It's interesting to study Kundalini because we can feel how this energy moves when we practice yoga, when we do yoga postures. when we do the breathing exercises, and on a more subtle level, when we practice mantras, the sounds. So these forms, these different techniques of yoga help us to move this kundalini in an upward direction. And it's very important because this is what sustains our health and our well-being. And we need this on our side. So I want to share with you another aspect of bhakti. And this refers to an important part of the Bhakti Sutras, Narada's Sutras here. And in Sutra 8, he says, Nirodastu loka veda vyapara ni yasaha. So Niroda is to cessate, to control. Tu, Nirodatu. But, on the contrary, loka veda vyapara, worldly and spiritual activities, and to renunciate them. So the meaning is that the cessation of desires consists in consecration of all worldly and as well as spiritual actions. So I want to share a simple story that was told in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's about an elephant king. Gajendra is his name, who one day he was bathing in the river, was attacked by a massive crocodile. And the crocodile grabbed a hold of his leg, and he fought for quite some time, to the point that he got so tired and fatigued, and the croc was tossing him left and right, almost to the point that it tore his leg off. And it tried to pull Gajendra into deeper water to drown him. And he continued to fight, continued to resist as much as he could. And even elephants that were observing this battle on the bank of the river felt that they couldn't help. And suddenly, Gajendra felt, oh no, here my life is going to end. And he detached and began his surrender. Suddenly, in this moment of surrender, he visualized Vishnu, his image of the divine. And Vishnu, as the preserver, launched this discus and killed the crocodile and saved the life of Gajendra. So this is a simple story, but it's allegorical, that this fight for life as one of our limbs, as the croc, as desires grab us and pull us, and drowned us into a big river or a big pool of desires, endless desires. We have to fight. We have to resist. But the highest weapon, if you will, the highest practice we have again to overcome those desires is to surrender. And to surrender to God and ask and turn to God for God's help. It is the secret to success in yoga. When we stop looking for outer solutions, when we turn our attention to the divine, when we turn within for solutions, literally solutions. It is the secret of success in yoga. It is the blossoming of our yogic vision when we begin to turn and look in that direction. Because it's a clever use of the mind, right? Rather than using the mind and directing that willpower towards the external battle of life that we may not win in many circumstances. That we may come out a loser in some way, that we may come out scarred and beaten. But when we turn to the divine, regardless of the scars, we attain victory. We attain that supreme goal of life. Patanjali Maharshi says that one cannot surrender to God by just adopting the sentimental attitude, I am thine, right? Or by rationally understanding that the world is not real and looking at all of these things merely from an intellectual level. He says that we must develop Ishvara Pranidhan, that true surrender that is attained by the integration of all four yogas: emotion, reason, willpower, and action. All four must be integrated into our personality. This is the highest yoga. Integral yoga is bridging and bringing these yogas together, because these are the four powers of the soul. These are the four powers or the four aspects of every individual. We have a practical side, we have an intellectual side, we have a devotional side, and we have a spiritual aspect. And so that surrender is the spiritual aspect. The willpower is the energy we have to use to discipline ourselves over those senses. The devotion is the conversion of emotion as an energy, as an outer energy, as a negative energy, into a positive energy. It is the merging devotion of mind and heart. And lastly is the practical side, the karma yoga. All four create an enormous momentum. When we can use these four together, they can help us to move in an evolutionary direction, in a transcendental way. And so this is essential to the path of bhakti. And we must remember this and try and integrate this into our lives. As an aspirant develops purity of heart, he grows inclined towards the path of bhakti. He gains insight that he is performing all his duties in life to serve the divine. Everything that you do, all your actions are dedicated as love towards God. We become an instrument. We become a powerful tool to serve humanity, to serve our family, our brothers and sisters, and to recognize it through the recognition of our oneness. When we help each other, when we support each other, we do that through devotion for love, because God's love, God's presence abides in all living beings. The tension in performing action is gradually replaced by the spirit of optimism, joy, and peace. So initially, a lot of our tasks, a lot of our duties in life seem very mundane, very worldly, but as we recognize that divine power that flows through us and offer them as a divine gestures towards God, they purify us and they bring us peace and a natural joy that comes from within. So this is where the karma yoga becomes blended. Our actions become blended with bhakti, with devotion. And thus a devotee becomes inspired, fulfilled by bhakti yoga. With the advancement of bhakti yoga, or devotion, a yogi develops insight into meditation. And all of the distractions of the mind, the busyness of the mind, because the emotions play a big role in disturbing the mind. Too much thinking is risky because one of those thoughts will hook on to something that triggers a past experience, a past memory, a past impression that is correlated to some emotion. And so bhakti is a purification for the mind that helps us to develop a meditative quality in the mind, a more concentrated, a more still power within the mind. And this naturally leads to the superconscious state referred to in yoga, or the enlightened state, as samadhi. It is for this reason that the Raja Yoga Sutras, another text, places importance on Ishvara Pranidhan, surrender or trust in the divine. And according to Patanjali, this energy is requisite to all the other yogas. To practice Ishvara Pranidhan, one must first embrace ahimsa, a lack of violence, or a natural compassion for life. One must embrace non-possessiveness, that nothing is ours or claim certain things to be our own. And other great principles like truthfulness, like discipline, and many others mentioned in the yamas and the niyamas. So as the water of meditation washes away the subtle impurities of the mind, the reasoning aspect of one's personality shines brighter and brighter. So we reason, and this is where the higher purified intellect, known as buddhi, becomes empowered, becomes ignited. And we reason, and we're able to discriminate, and we're able to use discernment, a very high quality of the mind, to separate us, to distinguish who we are from what is unreal. Thoughts, emotions, again, intellect, ego, all of these aspects of the mind. So meditation cleanses the mind of these superficial qualities or superficial aspects of the mind. It's like a bathing, it's like a cleansing. because the mind is becoming slower, more focused, more still. And in that stillness, we are able to have that direct vision of the self. The light of the soul appears at the top of the forehead. The illumined moon, because of the sun's power, the path of truth is the sun. The sun symbolizes following our truth, seeking truth. And that illuminates the moon, the real self. But that requires time. And we must recognize that all aspirants are at different levels in their evolution. And many have different tastes and temperaments. And this is where these yogas become so beautiful and so practical, because we can choose a yoga that works for us, that is most aligned to our disposition. Whether it be karma, bhakti, jnana, or raja, initially you choose one, and it's the vehicle that takes you into the racetrack, on the path, if you will, towards truth. And then the other yogas develop for that integral or integrative approach. And this is important to understand. So as you grow in knowing yourself, knowing your Ayurvedic disposition, your prakriti, your mind-body type, understanding your astrology signs, your rising sign in particular has a lot of importance, because the rising sign tells us much about your personality, how you relate to your body, how you will relate to the world, your ego, all of that. And that is an important factor in knowing whether you may be more of an intellectual bent, a more physically type, or maybe more devotional like Cancer types. Intellectuals tend to be more Geminis, right? Or even Virgos, very particular, because of the Mercurian energy. Mercury influences Virgo. So explore this in your sadhana. Explore this in your studies, in your reflective mind. And you will become aware of it. You will realize it. You will slowly come to embrace it. So I want to end our satsang with sage Narada, whom these sutras are attributed to. And his opinion with regards to the path of devotion is that, in his view, it is more potent than the other paths of wisdom, action, or meditation. And in pursuing the path of devotion, if this is your path, an aspirant seeks an ever-increasing awareness of divine love as a movement characterized by humility, self-effacement, and surrender. And these are qualities or attributes that are indispensable for true spiritual evolution. So devotion, if you're choosing that path, increases your awareness of a higher love, of not just a Cupid love for one being, but a feeling of connection to all life forms, to the animals, to nature, to all human beings. A true concern, a true care. And further, progress in the emotional aspect of one's personality is more directly related to life's deepest experience than is progress in reason, will, in action. So think about that, because the path of devotion and its correlation to emotion is a way to heal the mind. It's a way to overcome the obstacles of the mind. So the heart can heal the mind. The mind alone goes nowhere without the heart. And so the two find communion, connection, and balance. So let's end with a moment of stillness, wherever you are. If you can, take a seat. If you're standing, close your eyes. Direct the eyes upwards to the third eye. Take a few deep breaths. Feel more relaxed. Nilam Bhujashamal Komalangam Sita Samaro Pitavamabhagam Panu Mahasa Shakacharuchapam Namami Ramam Raghuvam Shanatam Namami Ramam Raghuvam Shanatam. Om Namah Shivaya. Hari Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Be loyal to God. Be loyal to the divine. Surrender, and all will be resolved. All truths will be revealed. And your true essence, the soul, the self, becomes the light of life. Thank you, and namaste.